So I'm going to start this meeting. Apologies for the delay. And welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. I'm going to start the meeting by asking whether there are any apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Harvey, Councillor van der Weyer, Councillor Miscanlon and Councillor Smith. We have Councillor Fain in attendance as Councillor Harvey's substitute.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Yes, the apologies were Councillors Harvey, Miscanlon, Smith and van der Weyer, and we have Councillor Fain substituting for Councillor Harvey. Okay, thank you. Right, so on then to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations, whether they have any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interest in any items on the agenda? Not seeing anybody wishing to make such a declaration. So item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting and the action log. So are we happy to agree the minutes as an accurate record of the last meeting? Thank you. So agreed. And then we have an action log with the number of items, the number I think being 2, one open and one closed. So no, three, 2 open, 1 closed. Are members happy to accept those updates on the action log? Yep, okay, thank you very much. So the next item is public questions, and I believe we do not have any of those. So we're now moving on to item 5, which is the improvement framework. And before we move to this, I'm just going to note that the committee has agreed to move item 7, demand responsive transport, to the end of the agenda on the grounds that it contains an exempt appendix, the contents of which members might stray into if they're not careful. So we will move demand responsive transport to the end of the agenda. I hope to have that discussion in full in public session, but it may become absolutely necessary to close the meeting to the public for part of that item. So improvement framework then, and we have with us Gordon Mitchell, the Chief Executive, Jodie Townsend, also with us, and Paul Staines and Edwina Adefahinti as our monitoring officer. So Gordon, can I ask you to speak to us and introduce this, please?
Yes, certainly. Good morning. In this freezing morning, yeah. I think I'm going to just do a little bit of an overview on some of the points in the report, and then my colleagues can potentially pick up other questions as people want to raise issues. But you'll, so by way of background, you'll remember that at the Combined Authority Board on the 30th of October, the board considered an improvement report, which is partly assessment, partly about setting up an independent improvement board, an external group, and thirdly, identifying some actions, some initial actions over the subsequent 3 months that would guide sort of priority activity and effort in that way. The report that's going to the Combined Authority meeting on Wednesday, and the one that you've got sight of, is the December report. So that's the second month of those 3 months set of actions. I think the couple of things I want to say are progress overall in December. Things have gone, notwithstanding Christmas and New Year, which inevitably takes a bit of time out for everyone. Progress is good. The most important things are on track, and some of the issues are time sensitive, and others are these early stages are more about exploration, seeking advice from other bodies, including things like the LGA on some of them, discussions with our partner and constituent councils in the area, and sometimes mapping activity as well. So the things where that are more time sensitive are really the first three. Let me say something about those. Of the 6 themes, let me just say something about the first 3, then say something about the Independent Improvement Board, and then a 3-month stock take. So in terms of progress, the first theme was about moving towards establishing an overarching strategy, making a bit more sense of the wide range of activities that the combined authority is already involved with, trying to both recognize the legacy of agreements in the last year or more, but also just beginning to narrow a little the plans for the next several years. And in some senses, this is a transitional document, primarily covering the final 2 years of his mayoral term and what we might focus on it there. The process for developing this has deliberately been inclusive. So with board members, there's been several group discussions about issues. There have been individual meetings with party groups on the board and with individual board members. There's been discussion with staff. There's been discussion several times with local authority chief executives and adaptation of the report. And that report is now going to board on Wednesday, seeking endorsement. And you'll know on the board agenda itself, that is closely related to the MTFP, because the application of our resources, both in terms of staff and funds, needs to reflect the shaping of the overall strategy, and that's what we've tried to do. The second issue is about resetting ways of working. And again, this has moved ahead in a number of dimensions. Part of that is the work that Jodie's been leading, particularly based on his earlier work about governance review, and that's a sort of incredibly big and detailed exercise. And again, there's been significant conversations informally with board members to get to this point. I think it's phase 1 of 2 is now in report form and on the agenda for Wednesday. Now, there's a lot of change within this, but the core message is, in terms of governance mechanisms, we need a clear statement of where we're going, application of resources, which are the 2 other papers, and then how we organize ourselves to deliver that in the best way. So it begins to sketch out a sharper definition of a role for the board itself, which is about retaining to itself discussions and decisions on strategy, overall application of resources, policies, in much in the same way as you would recognize in an individual council, that the council retains the longer term and overarching policies and decisions, but sees more delegation to committees within that framework to begin to progress work. And so this paper, although there's lots of detail, fundamentally is about trying to move towards that adjustment as we come into the next municipal year. I think members are clear on that. There may well be further discussions on some of the detail for all members to be completely comfortable before we get to the implementation in the new municipal year. Also on ways of working, and this was a very big issue when I came for interview at the very end of June last year. There was this very strong wish that in developing policy, considering performance and considering implementation, that the combined authority staff in particular should work much more closely alongside and with staff in the local councils. That's begun. I think it's a slightly longer term cultural shift, but certainly at chief exec level, I now have a monthly meeting with all the local authority chief executives on CPCA business. And in a range of these major papers, the chief executives are able to partly shape and partly consider what is best in there. Now I think that's a big shift. It's not complete and perfect, but is the basis of that change in greater depth in our organizations. And so in a number of other areas, particularly in the place directors and the finance officers, meetings of those professional groups have begun. And I wouldn't want to overstate it. I mean, I think, over the next year, that will mature, and the right sorts of material and discussions and timelines need to be built into the business processes. So that's moving along. The third area that I just want to dwell on then is the one that talks about developing long-term strategy in transport, and particularly reviewing the role and functioning of the business board. I think probably a bit of a discussion later in your meeting about transport, and particularly the element to do with buses. But broadly speaking, work has now crystallized around the transport and connectivity plan, which is now for consultation, I think. The element that's about bus networks and framework, you'll know in the very short term, because there was such a strong desire, we had an emergency intervention to support the buses that were cancelled 4 or 5 months ago. Now there's a discussion about how that can be funded on an ongoing basis. That's a first phase towards the bus service improvement plan. And it may be that Tim says something more about that later, the timing of that, because we're rather tied to government decisions about when exactly that can go in. But these are 2 steps to move towards the stated desire from the combined authority to explore bus franchising, which will obviously take a couple of years. So that's the 3 things I want to dwell on in terms of the programme. There are clearly 3 others, but those are more exploratory, and a lot of that is to do with operational processes between officers. The second issue then, just to say something briefly on, is the Independent Improvement Board. You might remember that we secured Lord Kerslake as the chair of that group, who is ex-head of the civil service. And before that, he was a lowly council chief executive before he reached these heights in several places, in London Borough of Hounslow and Sheffield City, before we went into the civil service. We also have Julie Spence, who's the vice chair, who's the ex-chief constable in your area and the currently Lord Lieutenant, and Anne, I can't remember her second name, who's a director at the West Midlands Combined Authority and the chief officer of the West Midlands Transport. We also have 3 leaders of councils, or two current leaders of councils, one who has been a leader and isn't just at the minute, all of whom are involved in combined authorities in other parts of the country in various forms. So it's an incredibly experienced, relevant group. The chair was very keen that when they came together for the first time that it should be face-to-face. That's meant a little bit of a delay to find a day when all could change their diaries to be together. That happened last Tuesday, I think it was, in Peterborough. And as a part of that day, the members of the independent board met all of the board members and all of the chief executives, really in listening mode, but that was to help them get a focus on the issues. And they will shortly set out some of the things that they want to focus on. They've asked me for a number of pieces of information to prepare formally for them, which we'll do. And we haven't circulated it yet, but they have chosen that they'll have a face-to-face get-together every 2 months and seek to maintain dialogue with the members of the Combined Authority Board, both in between that and invite them to have face-to-face contact as a part of each of those days. I think their initial feeling is they may well think of their work in terms of a 12-month period. And I think the thinking on that is not just about the tasks that are to be done and overseen and where they can help, but also that is probably the period where there's quite a number of changes going to be happening. So there will be a change from the interim officer leadership to permanent appointments over the next 6 months or so. The local elections for many of you will take place in May, and that may or may not throw up any other issues. And there are the mayor will come back from his period of absence at some point yet to be determined. So I think their feeling was that the only reasonable time where things could be in a more settled phase will be towards the tail end of this year and maybe into the next. So that's their initial thinking about 12 months. The third point, very briefly, is that as officers, because we set up an initial 3-month program, our thinking is that we should do a stock take at the end of that 3 months. And of course, that's coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And Angela Probert, who wasn't able to be here today, has been sketching out how we might conduct that. So it'll be a mixture of, have we done the tasks we set out, yes or no, but also some softer issues around how do people experience the changes that have happened so far and reflect on what more we've got to do. So there'll be a 3-month stock take report that's not just about ticking actions, it's about in a qualitative sense, how are we moving in this first quarter? So I think that's all I'd want to say, Councillor Dupree, by way of overview.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. Did Jodie or Paul have anything to add to that before I turn to members for their contributions?
Just to build on what Gordon has said, Chair, is obviously we've been to this committee previously to discuss the review of governance and those key foundations and fundamentals that the improvement plan was then going to pick up and look to place within the CA. The improvement report will obviously highlight some of those which Gordon has mentioned, workstream A being a corporate plan for consideration by the board, so we will finally have that clarity on strategic objectives, which is something this committee has previously raised as a concern and was very heavily raised in the review of governance. We'll then have that focus on boards and committees. We know what they're trying to drive through the corporate plan. And then workstream B is the outcome, really, is a report going to board on governance arrangements, which Gordon referred to again. That looks to give us that strategically focused board, which we've been looking to develop, and then properly empower our thematic committees to get on and deliver their areas of responsibility within the corporate plan. So some greater delegation to those committees to make approvals, decisions, etc., in line with the review of governance and in line with the improvement plan and all the engagement and consultation that's been done. And just to add on top of what Gordon said, this has been developed in line with that new approach of collaboration and engagement. There have been multiple engagements with chairs of this committee and A&G. I've been to A&G several times as well. We've been to numerous chief exec group meetings, numerous LSM meetings, and of course we had the review of governance, which had an awful lot of involvement from across the constituent authorities. And so we feel we're at a good point now to move everything on with those two outcomes, which are going to the January board meeting, the corporate plan and the governance arrangements, all in alignment with each other and in alignment with the MTFP.
Thank you very much indeed, Jodie. And does Paul have anything to add, or is Paul just happy to answer any questions we may have?
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions if required.
Thank you very much indeed. So I turn to members then. We are asked to consider this report and the highlights, and you will note on page 27 of the agenda bundle, the programme governance summary, that there is a space there for overview and scrutiny feedback, which will be inserted here once it has considered the highlight report. So that is the block that we are aiming to fill today with our comments, views and recommendations to the board. So, Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you very much for the report. It's been a very interesting read. One of the things that has struck me around Workstream B and governance is it hasn't really considered our statutory role here and how we would plug into it. There's quite a bit of change and of delegation going on, and I think perhaps you need to consider how we also match with that. I don't think we're in a situation where we're currently being able to serve our function without rather more work here so that we align. I noticed there was a focus group mentioned in one of the reports. Forgive me, I can't find it now. It might have been in one of the board papers. But one of the things I think is very important is that we have a discussion about particularly Workstream B and about how we perform our statutory function of governance in an effective way. Just as a matter of personal interest, I'm lead member for skills, so I'm very much interested. I go to the skills committee meetings, and I thought I'd made a breakthrough when I was invited to attend an officers' skills meeting. I thought, fantastic, at last I can find out the inner workings, only to be disinvited because I wasn't a board member and therefore couldn't qualify. I found that rather surprising because I'm hardly an enemy of skills. I'd very much want to be able to support it and to do my role as oversight and scrutiny well. So to have been told you can't go seemed a little bit unhelpful. So I'd be very keen that under the Workstream B, the oversight and scrutiny function is very much involved in how that works with this new structure, because I don't think it's right. And if you want to look at Chapter 14 of the Constitution about how we're set up, that's a bit out of date now, and I think that needs to be worked on so it works effectively and more collaboratively with the new board structure. I think that was a question, but it's more of a comment. But thank you, Chair.
I think that's feedback to fill that box, actually. So thank you very much indeed, Councillor Coles. That's useful. Councillor Fane.
Thank you, Chair. This may be a question we can come back to later, but while Gordon Mitchell is with us,
Microphone.
not working. It is. While Gordon Mitchell is with us, there was reference to the LTCP, obviously a lot riding on that. And in this report, at 4.5, and indeed elsewhere, there is a risk that the LTCP will not align with the Department for Transport's final guidance and will therefore not be fit for purpose. And I'm just wondering at what stage we are likely to know that. I appreciate that may be a matter of detail for others. And how this Workstream C can be taken forward around that risk.
Perhaps I could offer an answer there, and then Gordon can clarify if I miss anything. So it would be wrong to think that we are progressing, Chair. If I may answer through you, forgive me. If it would be wrong for us to think that we're progressing OLTCP in isolation from the anticipated guidance from the Department of Transport. Officers are actually talking informally to the DFT all the time, trying to get an inside curve on exactly what this guidance is likely to say, to make sure that when it does eventually get it published, and as I understood last week, although matters may have changed, it still hadn't been, we weren't likely to get any nasty surprises. So although it remains a risk, I think it's probably a risk that's been diminished as far as we are able at the moment, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. Could I, before I come to the other members who've indicated, ask you to amplify a bit? There's the alignment or not with DFT requirements, but there's also the issue of alignment with the Greater Cambridge Partnership and its work. And I wonder whether that's indeed not a bit more of a risk and how that is being managed.
Perhaps if I could address the former national issue, and I could ask my colleagues just to speak about the issue more regionally. The LTCP national guidance has been outstanding from DFT for some months. It was originally promised in the autumn, and there has been a series of unexplained delays, if you will, which we just put down to the machinations of government. The risk is only really the pace that we're trying to produce this matter for, Chair, both for public consultation, but also, as you rightly say, our partners are raising the increasing risk that as they progress their own transport plans, that we need to make sure that the overarching LTCP that we produce is complementary and an appropriate framework for that. So it is an emerging risk, which chief executives have spoken about. The exact flavour and strength of that risk, though, I think is not something that we within the programme have yet quantified, but Gordon may wish to comment further.
Shall I just add a word, which is not to repeat anything that Paul said, and you, of course, you might want to pick this up with Tim later on as well, but life doesn't stop because we're not able to get the clarity of government guidance, but as well as the reference that Paul's made to regular discussion between officers and DFT officials, there are, of course, very regular discussions between transport officers and CPCA, GCP, and the two highways authorities. So it's, I think all the officers are clear where people are trying to go, and collectively, in a sense, all we're trying to do is minimize the chance of things getting out of sync without putting things just on hold, because real life moves on. So it's imperfect, but it was always us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's something we'll explore further in our agenda item on the LTCP in itself. So Councillor Goldsack was next.
Yeah, just a very quick point, and thank you, gentlemen, for your comments and the report. Having read the report over the weekend and thought I got to grips with it, this is a battle for ONS, and we actually had a discussion this in the pre-meet, because actually having heard the supporting words, particularly Jodie and Gordon in the bit that they said, that's actually opened my eyes up to a different way of looking at the report, which means a different style of scrutiny, which I can't really feel that I can add value to on the spot now. You see what I mean? So we're being asked to comment on a report, but actually we've just been given, I think, a different way of looking at it, or some added value ways of looking at it. And I think that's a battle for ONS as to how we fit into that. 2 days before a board meeting, we've got to put these comments in, but actually I've now got a fresh opinion as to how to look at this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Chair, if I might just make a slightly more general point here, because Councillor Goldsack's point relates to the one from Councillor Coles earlier about developing the role of overview and scrutiny. In a very general way, we've tried to prepare the ground by trying to work towards more advanced notice of what's coming through the business, and that'll happen at officer level by the development of service and departmental plans in a way we've not had before, but off the back of the corporate plan, that will mean between now and the end of March, officers will work on service plans and in management terms, individual objectives as well. But we'll also try to do that with the forward plan. So certainly at the point I arrived mid-year, we were really just giving the shortest possible notice about items coming up in the forward plan for board. You may not have noticed, and it needs more development, but we are now trying to populate the forward plan for 6 months, so that it should be possible for overview and scrutiny to begin to look at the forward plan and say, oh, there's an item coming up in 3 months' time. Isn't that something we should get a focus on and get some prior briefing on, even before a paper for board is actually fully formed or drafted? So that needs to happen gradually, but that's partly about your planning as well. I think I'm right in saying that there were some conversations between members here a month or two ago about about some of the different choices you have about how to play your role. And clearly, if it's only about very late scanning of papers going to board, it is always going to be distinctly constrained and handicapped. And so I think it is about looking forward for priority strands of work that you choose to look at. And it may also be about deciding, and I think Jodie raised this some time ago, about perhaps deciding on a theme for a year, which might be about a way of working, or it might be topics. But I think Jodie referred to other places where overview and scrutiny is taking a role, and it would work here. So part of my assessment of the issues for the combined authority is that when I arrived, it did feel very siloed in terms of its work. And clearly, to get the best effect out of the combined authority, we need to be looking at the connectivity between different policy strands and delivery. And in some other combined authorities, overview and scrutiny has taken that perspective as a role, actually, to quiz items on the basis of, well, how is the connection between that policy area and other policy areas being planned, between transport and housing and skills and so on, actually probing particularly about that interconnectivity. But I mean, it's not the only option, but that is an option. But my short answer is yes, I agree with the comments. There's a significant opportunity to develop the role. It's partly about getting the processes aligned, and it's certainly about planning ahead, I think. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Gordon. Jodie.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important, and this will relate to what Councillor Coles and Councillor Goldsack have said. It's about relating at the moment to putting the foundations in place that will allow overview and scrutiny to perform its role moving forward. And I think we had conversations previously through the review of governance about how scrutiny is currently constrained and able to undertake its role due to the lack of information and some of those key governance foundations within the combined authority. As Gordon has said, we're moving to the position now where we have a corporate plan which sets out clear strategic objectives, which will set out strategic performance measures. We will then have forward planning that will go to 6 months on moving forward. We'll then have clear performance measures that sit within the responsibility of each of our thematic committees, included in those annual delivery plans. And we'll have clear lines of roles and responsibilities in regards to whose job it is to deliver those objectives, which are all things we've discussed, Chair, previously that weren't there and really restricted scrutiny's ability to undertake its role. We are having conversations inside and just to reassure you in regard to the ways of working with officers, so that they remember to, when they are developing ideas, projects, programs, whatever it may be, that they remember to include scrutiny in those early conversations. So they remember to include scrutiny in drop-in session offers or briefings, or potentially in pre-meets. So there is work going on in that front as well. And hopefully you'll recall that I've previously shared with the committee a paper which led to you amending your work programme about some of the key things we need to pick up and to be led by you, the scrutiny committee, to shape the role of scrutiny across the region moving forward, and make sure we are really focused on combined authority scrutiny. So, for example, in your February work programme, there is going to be an item around developing and establishing key scrutiny principles for this region, which Gordon referred to earlier. In the West Midlands, they have a key scrutiny principle of how do they ensure the combined authority is always taking integrated decision making. So as Gordon said, referring to a transport decision, making sure it takes into account communities, housing, environment, etc., to move away from those silo principles. And in Greater Manchester, of course, they have a principle of through scrutiny of what is the next step in regards to devolution for this topic. And they have a key list of questions around that. And that may be something that obviously you want to develop across this region. We've also got an item at your February meeting around how the committee can contribute to enhancing accountability. Now, hopefully, we've got to the point of removing some of that mist around who is responsible for what are the strategic objectives, and what are the key performance measures for those. You will hopefully feel a bit more empowered and in a better position to hold those individuals to account for those key performance measures. And we've also got an item on your future work programme around what is the strategic role for the scrutiny committee? So in regard to the development of strategic objectives in the future and in regard to the policy agenda. And I think the annual plan process will have a really big impact on that. So you can identify those areas that you have particular interest where you feel you can add value in regard to the development of policy within those particular strategic objective themes. So I just added a final point, really welcome those comments from Councillor Goldsack and Councillor Coles. It's a big thing I've been trying to push since I've been at the CA, to really establish the scrutiny function across the region in a CA context. Remembering, of course, that the guidance is that CA scrutiny is different to that within local authority. We should have a strategic context and a strategic focus. And I think we're now getting to the point where those key foundations, key information will be there to support and enable you to do that role.
Thank you, Jodie. And just for your information and Gordon's too, the committee has moved to a view that it would want to replace the February meeting with an informal briefing and discussion for the whole committee to concentrate on those issues. So that's where we are at the moment, I think. So I'm going to move to Councillor Hay next, and then Councillor Atkins, and then Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, most of my questions have already been answered because I was concerned that we're not seeing a forward plan from the Combined Authority that goes far enough that we can discuss things at an earlier date. I mean, up until now, a lot of what we've discussed has been about what's in the board meetings 2 days after this meeting. And that, to me, does not give us time to add value. So having said that, as I say, most of that's been already answered. But I have got another small thing that I am concerned about. In 3.29 under theme B, implement a comprehensive reset of ways of working and align the policy development and pre-board processes, it actually says that the RAG rated is amber, reflecting that whilst most actions are on track, no work has yet started on the wider partnership engagement elements. A revised timetable of 1st of March 2023 has been proposed, for this will allow the workstream RAG rating to be green. To me, that's either a poor wording, or it makes it look as if we're trying to cover up the fact that we're failing to meet our targets, because once you've changed it, nobody's going to see that it's only changed to green because we've changed the date. You know, there's got to be some way of acknowledging that the original date still hasn't been met, even though we've changed the date.
Comment on that from?
Yeah, shall I pick that up? It's, I mean, in one sense, I talked to that point. So that's the issue of ways of working, which is a number of different dimensions to it. The part of that that's around developing more functional officer networks between all the councils and CPA officers. I did say that is changed quite radically at chief exec level, has begun to change at chief officer level, but we clearly need to gradually evolve that for a wider set of officers. And it's not just about having meetings, it is about plans to progress work. So you can, I agree the wording doesn't help, but I think in this particular case, you could argue that the task wasn't defined well enough. So in 2 months, you know, since the end of October, 1st of November, we clearly have shifted the practice, but it will just take further months between all the chief execs to get our range of officers into routines of meeting each other. That's the reality of the work, even if the words don't describe that quite well enough.
Thank you for that. But it's not just on this one element. Further on in the report, in 2 or 3 places, it mentions changing the RAG rating so that we can then change it to green. So it's not just in the one element.
Yeah, I accept the point about that type of phraseology. I think in all or nearly all of those cases, it's the equivalent of what I've just said, which is having started the work, people are agreeing that the full delivery of that will take a little longer than 3 months. But the 3 months has given us a sort of emphasis to focus on the work. But saying it's done and tick it off doesn't feel realistic to the wider group of officers in councils.
Thank you. Presumably the corollary of not doing what's being suggested is that we will never, ever, ever see those items go green, and we will be stuck perpetually having failed, which I'm not sure is a position we want to be in. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of things I want to raise. Do you want me to take them one at a time or rattle through them all at speed? Okay, rattle through at speed. So, as a result of this work that's been going on, we now have a new mayoral sort of ambition statement. We've got combined authority strategic priorities. But it seems to me that if this combined authority is going to be successful, it's going to depend on those two sets of things being really well sort of triangulated with the priorities of central government. And I'm not seeing at the moment where that fits in with the themes for improvement, and who is really taking ownership of the issue of yes, we do need to agree our priorities locally and understand those, but if we're not aligned to central government, then there won't be the money to do what we want to do, and that's sort of the secret sauce that makes the whole thing work. So I would appreciate any further comments on how you see that fitting in within these themes, who you see really owning that, and who's kind of driving improvement in that area. So that was the first issue. The second, with the Independent Improvement Board, it sounds like it has been sort of successfully started, and it's a very successful recruitment, which should be welcomed, and we should thank the people who have agreed to serve on it. I'm slightly concerned, though, as the interim chief executive alluded to, that it has been delayed in its start, and this is a program that's moving at speed. And I mean, I perhaps wouldn't want to speak for all the councillors at this table, but we've all been around the combined authority a little while now. We meet pretty regularly, and I think we're finding it a little difficult to keep up with the pace of what's happening and provide timely input. And I'm concerned how you're going to support the Independent Improvement Board to really add value when there's so much happening so quickly, and they're only just kind of getting underway now. So I wonder if anyone can allay those concerns. And my final issue was just a very specific question around bus franchising, which appears to be, if anything, is the kind of number one priority, certainly in the transport remit, perhaps across the whole combined authority in terms of what it wants to achieve in the next 2 years. I just wonder how much kind of breathing space do we have to actually achieve that in 2 years? Does a successful implementation of bus franchising mean that everything has to go completely perfectly now for the next 2 years to get that properly implemented and in place, or actually do we still have some breathing room left in case other things delay it along the way, such as changing government guidance, to pick one example, not quite at random? So yes, answers to those three, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Gordon?
Yes, let me pick up first. The first point on matching and knitting together the combined authorities statements of priority with government statements. I think that that's not a defined timed issue. I mean, government changes policy, develops policy at different times. So it's not, I don't think it's that much different from what you would expect your chief exec and senior management in your own councils to be doing, which is keeping abreast of the discussions with government and being able to flex where there are particular issues or opportunities in a very specific way around some short-term funds. That happened just before Christmas. There was a communication from DLUC about the scope to bid against an unallocated fund. We had 72 hours to do it, with some very relatively unclear guidelines, but in that quite operational space, officers in the combined authority worked with officers in each of your councils to put together bid material in the format requested, in the timescale that was then submitted. And amidst all the other things that were going on, you would be forgiven for not picking up that we actually gained funding for 3 of those projects we put in, which was just a bit less than £9 million as a sort of extra. So I think that exercise of understanding your officers are close to and maintain close relations with civil servants is par for the course, led by the chief exec. We have other networks as well. The one of the most useful networks in which we participate is called the M10 group, the Mayoral 10. And there are both professional networks, so the finance officers meet every month, the chief executives meet every month, and the mayors meet monthly. Later this week, and it's a two-way conversation, so later this week on Thursday afternoon, the mayors, including our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Smith, will be meeting with Michael Gove for half an hour collectively. There are plans for them to meet a transport minister in coming weeks too. So it is about just continually seeking engagement in different ways to maintain intelligence and react in the right way. The second question about the Independent Improvement Board, the delay is clearly not ideal. On the other hand, that was their choice. They're voluntary and not subject to prescription from us or anyone else. So the 17th of January was the first date they could physically get into the same place. So that's what they plan to do. In terms of support, we have allocated an executive assistant to help with all the arrangements and pursue the tasks that they might come up with. And that's been in place for several months now, because there's been a variety of pre-discussions with individual members of the board, and the chair of the board, Lord Kerslake, has spoken to quite a wide, had interviews with quite a wide range of people, both people on our board, people in the area that might have a perspective on the combined authorities work. He's had meetings with civil servants in government about their perspective. So it's not like nothing happened, even from them, prior to the 17th of January. And Lord Kerslake met with the local authority chief executives, I think it was about the 21st or 22nd of December, for several hours. I mean, their task is really not to look at progress in the themes and confirm that we've ticked off the tasks as there. I think their task is to look at where they can add value over and above that program management. And so they will clarify where that is, but clearly one element of it is with the board and its focus, in tune with what we've said. It's not just about saying, wouldn't it be great if the board had a much stronger strategic focus? It will be working with board members in how that might become a reality in terms of processes and behaviours and aspirations. I think there probably is another issue for them around how the combined authority better communicates its performance. I mean, I'm aware of that, but that needs to be better in public and through the board. But it's, they're very clear that they need to be identifying particularly where they can add value from their experience. They're not there as an examination group asking whether we've done our homework right. It is about actually trying to sit alongside us, partly provoke, partly challenge, and partly support with the individuals that are there. And then the third point around burst franchising, I think you're right. It has, through the crisis of 4 or 5 months ago, the focus on buses and bus services, I think, probably has become a very, very high priority, agreed across all groups, that we need to move towards a bus framework for the whole of the area. And again, you may or may not want to bring this up with Tim. Tim's view is that using the right support, we could potentially get to the point of agreeing the business case in 2 years. And you've got to remember there are a number of stages to this. There's the BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan, which will probably be finalized, already in draft, but it'll probably be finalized in June. Again, it's delayed because the government guidance on BSIPs, they have said they're going to adjust it. And we are trying to align with when government says it's going to bring out the guidance, the next version of guidance. Then we need to do the work on developing bus franchising business case, because the way that works is, and it's a very big piece of work, it's about assessing the need for bus services in detail across our patch. And the business case element is key. So the finances have to work. The finances of tendered routes have to work with the ability of the combined authority to maintain subsidy of other routes. Now, one of the big debates that will inevitably come up for this committee and the board over the next 2 years is the underlying issue, which is, by entering bus franchising, the business case, financial business case, has to add up. But secondly, in deciding that it's happy with that, the combined authority is in effect taking on the financial risk of reality not being quite in line with the business plan. And that's a very big decision for the authority. At the point of agreeing a business plan in 2 years' time, that doesn't mean suddenly all the buses and bus contracts are in place at that point. There's then another phase of implementation. And if that's what the combined authority does, the number of staff that will be employed will increase enormously. I mean, the bus network operation will probably need to employ as many staff as we had now across the whole of the organization. It will be a very large organization, a bus franchising operator. But that's partly why we've got the director from the West Midlands Transport Authority is to actually, and she'll be meeting with the various teams in Peterborough City, Cambridge County, and CPCA to begin to explore how they did that several years ago, and how we might take a step forward. So it's a really difficult, big exercise, and I don't underestimate that myself. I think the bigger strategic issue is yet to come for the combined authority, which is the financial risk that comes with all of that. That's a real biggie. I think that's probably all I would say, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, you want to come back? I'm conscious of time, so very, very briefly, please.
Yes, thank you. I don't necessarily want a response from officers on this, but just to be clear, I'm concerned on the bus franchising that none of that nuance is anywhere is coming through particularly clearly in terms of the ambitions and the priorities, and where I think we're slightly setting people up for disappointment if we just say, oh, our top priority is bus franchising, but it's going to take, it's going to take more like 4 to 6 years than the 2 years that this document sort of notionally kind of relates to. And I would like to see some evidence of an awareness that nevertheless our relationship with central government could still be improved and our understanding of their priorities could still be improved. It's good to hear that officers have the space and the flex to respond at short notice, but we need to be thinking we need to know what they're thinking before they think it, if we're gonna really succeed. But I'll hand over to other members now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Hassel was next.
Yes, thank you, and I welcome the comments on committee effectiveness. I'm just really following on from the question that was asked by Councillor Hay. Just really a high-level question on the RAG status of the programme, really. So I note that I think only theme A is green, all the rest are amber. So some just high-level comments, really, as to with so many work streams being amber, as to whether that's just changes in scope, obviously some concerns of government not providing us with the right information, but some, should we be concerned? Are we heading towards red in some areas, or is the likelihood in the coming months we'll go back to green?
Would you like me to comment
Yes.
on this, Gordon?
Okay, Paul.
If I may, through you, Chair. I think actually Gordon has alluded already to probably the answer to this in his earlier questions. This, of course, is a report which is at a point in time, and as Gordon rightly pointed out, as we have got into the weeds of the programme, the very ambitious timeline that was set for the improvement, a quite rightly ambitious timeline, needs to perhaps be a little bit more realistic in places, partly to allow for such things as we talked about, the lack of the LCTP guidance, partly because the inclusive way of working that we need to promulgate through the improvement plan, in just the same way as we need to promulgate through the other ways of working with the combined authority, has necessitated, for example, focus group meetings, involvement of chief executives, and it has all led, I think, to a slowing of the process. So, as one of your colleagues rightly pointed out, Chair, in the narrative of this, we do talk about the fact that we are realigning those timelines to be a little bit more realistic. And it will mean, I think, that for some of these work streams in the January improvement plan, they will return to green. And that will be the journey that you and your colleagues will see. I would also point out, however, that things being flagged as amber is not, in my view as programme manager, an issue. Amber would be freely defined as there being continuing issues with the programme and challenges that are being managed in accordance with the programme. And I think it would probably be slightly wrong, given the overall journey that the improvement plan is making for the authority. I think we would be surprised to see all of them green at this early stage. Much of the framework that will drive the new ways of working, the strategic clarity, the enhanced governance, all of these things will be in place. The changes to the culture and the ways of working with the combined authority that will flow from that begin in the manner that Gordon's described. But they only begin now with the Independent Improvement Board and the board driving those forward. And I think given where we are in the journey, I do feel that amber is an encouraging but realistic overall status for the programme, if I may.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Councillor Hay, you wish to come back once more. I think you're the last speaker on this.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to bring this up later, but as the subject of buses and bidding has already been brought up to central government, I have a question. At the last ONS meeting where we discussed buses, we were led to believe that any plan to go for funding from central government was dependent on congestion charges, and without congestion charges that we would not gain funding. This, I believe it's not true. I believe a member stood up in Parliament last week and basically said as much. And I also understand that at least 2 other authorities have received funding from central government without including congestion charges. I'd just like some clarity on that, please.
I'm not sure the improvement item is a place for that. However, I would also point out that just because somebody stood up in Parliament and said something doesn't automatically make it true. There has been a freedom of information request, which has surfaced the only piece of actual evidence which we have. And I believe that there is a clarification coming forward to the report that you brought to this committee some months ago, in which that statement was made, which was the only place I think that that statement has been made up till now. So yeah, okay, I'm not sure that this is the place for it, and we are short on time. But comments noted, and I know that your report is being revised. So I think that's it from members. We've got a number now of statements that it's potential that we might wish to put in as our comments to the program level highlight report. Can I just quickly run through them? I noted 8 from the debate, and can I just ask whether we wish to include these in some way, so that we can shape them up before these go in, which is short on time now. The first one was wanting to ensure that overview and scrutiny is seen as an integral part of the operation of the combined authority, and ensure that it properly aligns into governance and into the governance review, and that members of overview and scrutiny are properly engaged and included in meetings relating to issues that are within our remit, which is pretty much everything, and therefore have that opportunity to engage. Is that a point that we wish to make in this report? Yep. The second point I noted was the question about the risk of the non-alignment of the LTCP with emerging government guidance on LTCPs. Do we wish to note our concern that that remains a risk? I think was what we were saying. Or are we satisfied on that? Do we want to include that in our comments? Some doubt on that, I think. I'd like to see a stronger view of yes or no. Can I see those in favour of including a comment to that effect? 1, 2, 3, and those are 4, and against including that. Not 1. So I think that is included, and we will send round, I think, to all members draft wording before that is submitted. The third one was about the need for information for overview and scrutiny in order to enable it to fulfil its developing role. Do we want to make that point? I think we've made it before. Do members want to make that again as an issue? Yeah, okay. Timeliness, yeah. Okay. The fourth one was about the RAG rating for workstream B in particular, but also potentially others, and the changes that are made in order to provide a new date in order to turn that amber into green. Is that something that we wish to say, or are we convinced that the officers have addressed that? Councillor Robertson.
I think we were I think the answer we got from the chief executive was that we must regard the amber status as a temporary stage towards green. And I don't think just saying we've got a problem with it is the answer. I think we were aware that we've not got to green yet, but with time we will.
I think RAG status in general cropped up in a later comment, which I'll return to, but I think specifically, did we feel the officers had addressed that? I sort of felt that they had. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm disinclined to pursue that. The mayoral ambition statement and priorities and triangulation with central government and who owns and how we can fulfil what we're doing. Is that something we want to express as an ongoing concern? Yes, no. Yep, I'm seeing nods. Um, the delayed start to the work of the Independent Improvement Board and how that will enable, how given that, how it will fulfil its function in a timely way and enable things to progress. Is that something we wish to raise with the board? Not particularly, no.
Chair, I think it is in their own gift as to when they
Yep,
start. I think it would be
It is.
inappropriate for us to
Yep.
mention it.
Just wanting to tick things off the list. Bus franchising, did we want to raise our concern about setting? I think the concern was more about setting realistic expectations now in the light of what we've heard about the timeline. Does that sound like something we wish to express to the board, that they need to be able to be realistic with everybody about the timeline for this? Yeah, yeah. Then the last one I had on my list was the RAG status generally, and about whether we were comfortable with 5 out of the 6 work streams being amber.
Yeah, I think it's a question for the board to ask themselves. Is the board comfortable with the similar situation?
Do we want to? Are you suggesting we don't raise that with the board then, or
I think
comment
it should
on
be
it?
raised with the board.
I think we should I personally I think we should comment on it. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. That's 6 points that we will craft for our comments to go into the highlight report, and I will. We will work at all speed, and I will ask for all members to be sent the draft of that once I've had a look at it, bearing in mind we are very short on time. Okay, so I think we've done our job on that. So thank you very much, members Gordon, Jodie, Paul, for your inputs into that. We're now going to move on to our next item, and I need to say we are now at 11 minutes past 12. We are very much at the edge, the crumbling cliff edge of quoracy. So if any member leaves this meeting, the remaining business does not happen. So I need to remind members of that, firstly, to keep, and officers indeed, to keep comments as succinct as possible, but remind members that we are at the edge of having to discontinue the meeting. The next item is the local transport and connectivity plan, and in particular the outcome of the consultation on that. So we have Tim Bellamy with us. Tim, is there anything you want to say briefly by way of introduction to this, please?
Yeah, just quickly to take people through and to alleviate some of the concerns I think was raised earlier in the meeting. So
I apologies, Tim. Are you right? We will have to suspend the meeting until Councillor Robertson returns. Again, I apologise, Tim. Would you like to restart or resume?
no worries. Just for members and the chair's clarification, I just wanted to add some insight into paper, just because I know you've had the discussion already around the guidance, etc. So the attached paper was taken to the Transport Committee Infrastructure Committee last week, and the Combined Authority continues to work on the LTCP. As outlined, we do await the draft guidance from the Department for Transport, and this was in relation to the local transport planned and also the quantified carbon assessment. This was due originally in early April 2020, so sorry, 2022, and so we've been waiting for nearly 6 months to see sight of this. But we have been advised that in order to access funding going forward, it is important for our document to contain reference to the DFT priorities, and it may preclude us from bidding for funding if that's not the case. I personally continue to liaise with DFT officials to understand the likely areas of focus, and ourselves and Oxfordshire are in very similar situations, and we're looking to progress and agree our LTCPs or LTP in Oxfordshire case as the earliest opportunity. The DFT have outlined that they believe the focus for them will be around environment, economic growth, and a transport system that is attractive for all. So I would say that they're quite broad in their priorities at the moment. But what we need to do is to map out the guidance when we receive it to make sure it aligns to our LTCP. Those members that because this has been quite a long time in the making, we've done public engagement and public consultation. And the reason why this was previously on the agenda for this period was the fact that the final draft was meant to come at this point to the Overview Scrutiny to review it ahead of being agreed at the March round of Transport Intra Committee and Board. It is now envisaged, as I think our Chief Exec outlined earlier, that this will be now signed off in May, June. That's what we're envisaging. Because ultimately we do need to take into account the government guidance as and when that arrives, and need to map against that as it goes forward. But also the information that we've achieved and the data that's underpinning it at some point will become will need to be refreshed, etc. So we'll need to take a decision about when to take that forward. But the programme as it currently is envisaged is the draft final will go to the Transport Intra Committee in March, with a final document going to the May due round of this committee, but also the Infrastructure Committee and Board.
Thank you very much indeed. We're invited to comment on this report. Members, Councillor Coles.
Chair, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the report. I was very interested in the consultation, and perhaps you can allay some of my cynicism, dare I say. 928 submissions, so we've got, what, 895,000 people living in the region. So that's roughly 1 in 1,000 have commented. I'm just hopeful that you can say to me that you can eliminate whatever special interests or biases that people who've consulted might have. For example, maybe if everybody in the cycle forums had commented and very few other people did, there might be undue emphasis upon cycling as a solution. It's just one of my views that when we have these low level of consultation numbers, that we have to try to eliminate whatever special interest and biases are there, so we can hear what the majority of our populations are saying. And there's a distinct lack of input from car drivers about any interest in electrification, for example, or in car sharing, and very much emphasis on climate change and on cycling, which suggests to me that not everybody who might have a view have bothered to get involved in the consultation. So that's my challenge to you, really.
In addition to the public consultation events that we went through, we also did some public engagement with businesses and third sector and other main employers, etc. So understanding their views and understanding that some of their concerns aren't just addressed by, say, active travel. They need to look at freight delivery, first and last mile by freight delivery, car travel as well, because actually for a period of time, car transport will remain an option for lots of people going forward. So therefore, we do need to take that into consideration. And so we did do engagement and focus groups as well as just the public engagement that you will have seen in the pack here. And the other thing is, with regard the alternative fuel strategy, that went out for consultation as well around where we want electric charging, etc. going forward. So that work is continuing. So that sort of answers that some of that concern you've got, but we have actually tried to address businesses and other people concerns as well.
I'm relieved you've covered quite another area, but I think it's just in terms of, if we are going to do a consultation, is there any means of individuals declaring special interest so that we know where they're coming from, and so we can cover any perception that perhaps we're not getting an overall view, but a view just of special interest groups?
So just on that, yes, we have gave an option to say what sort of, if they're answering on behalf of an organisation or an interest group, etc. That we have that information that we can drill down into that information if we need to going forward.
I'd love to see that detail if that's possible to pass it on. Thank you very much.
Was that an indication you wish to speak, Councillor Goldsack? Right, yes. Right, okay.
Very difficult to talk on a mic to the chap to my left, but I'll do my best. It's a very simple comment, and I do this to wherever I see it. We've got some lovely pie charts, yeah, lovely, great, and they look great, and they tell us the exact story. Councillor Coles has already highlighted the limited number of responses, but I love the fact in each one you're telling us the percentage that strongly agreed or agreed. Well, actually, the cumulative of those is approximately 40%, which basically means 60% didn't. And I just think, we always get the reports that show us the 40%. Well, guess what? That's 2 out of 10. 4 out of 10. I apologise. My maths was terrible. 4 out of 10. So that means that 6 out of 10 didn't. And I just think, I'd like just a little bit of balance in some of these sometimes. I think otherwise it's an excellent report and an excellent start. But I always smile when I see this. It's if the graph doesn't go bottom left to top right, change the axes. We see it all the while in local authorities.
Before I bring in Councillor Sharp, I also had a comment on the pie charts, which I think is germane here. I was going to come at it from a slightly different direction. It was interesting to note, looking at the responses which agreed or strongly agreed, that the highest response in support was in Greater Cambridge, 45%, with the others somewhere between 38 and 40%. However, that belies the fact that if you add the disagree and strongly disagree together, the area of strongest disagreement was Greater Cambridge at 30%, whereas the others were between 12.6 and 18.5. So I think it's a fair point that the useful thing to do is to set off the strongly agree and agree against the disagree and strongly disagree to see what the balance is there, because that tells a very different story. But my second point on that was that it's difficult to tell what agree or disagree means, particularly disagree, because in disagreement you will have people who will say, I think it's absolutely terrible that we're doing this at all and it must stop. On the other hand, you have people who are saying, I'm really disappointed that we're not doing this enough or fast enough, and therefore we must do a lot more of it. And both of those are being counted as disagree or strongly disagree, but from completely different perspectives. Therefore, while the pie charts are pretty and coloured, and that's all very nice, and they were invented by Florence Nightingale, fun fact for those who didn't know, I think we need to very much take those with a pinch of salt for different reasons to those put forward by Councillor Goldsack, but coming to the same sort of conclusion via a different route. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a brief comment really around the time scale, the timetable, because you mentioned it will come to this committee in May or June, but this committee probably won't meet in May because we have to be constituted by the board before we can meet, which will be sometime in June. So, and I know you said it's going to transport and infrastructure in March, which is great, and I think maybe we can discuss it later because I'm sure we would want an input into what the new, in the light of the consultation, what changes, if any, have been made to it. So, but obviously, we want this in place as quickly as possible, and I understand you're waiting on government to come up with the various principles before you can finalise it. But I think you may be optimistic with June if the ONS, whatever that is, it state that's in, after the May, and for them to look at it. So before it goes to board, if that makes sense. But we need it obviously we need it as quickly as possible.
Any response quickly on that?
Yes, sorry.
Tim,
So
before I
just
bring
on the 2 points, I think one regard the pie charts and the basic level of information. So I didn't want to necessarily overload the committee with all the thousands of comments that came alongside it. I can provide those as well. So if people want to see those and positive, negative, and those bits, exactly what you're saying, Chair, around it's not just around simple yes or no, and the numbers that Councillor Goldsight was saying, actually some of that detailed information, we do have that, so we can try and pull those out. And in regards to timeframes, I understand the point, and I will work with the monitoring officer around what the appropriate timing is to bring that back to the committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to make a slightly general point that I'm not really in favour of dividing our local population into special interest groups on the basis of whether or not they happen to own a car or a bicycle or both or a scooter. I'm not sure that's a terribly helpful way of thinking about the population that we're here to represent. And so I would caution against lumping people together like that. I'm not sure that's terribly helpful. I had one specific question out of this consultation, which is, do you feel I mean, you must have spent hundreds of hours now looking at the responses to this consultation. Do you have any concerns as to a particular uh, segment of the population which you think has not engaged and you're concerned their views have not been taken into account, whether that's, say, by geography, where they live, by age, perhaps by income? Are there any kind of segments along those factors where you think actually, we do have, because of delays in central government, there is an opportunity perhaps in the next couple of months for focused work on any of those slices where you think actually we could do with some more information?
Just with that in mind, the area that I was concerned around would be the engagement with young people and actually access to education and skills. And I have spoken to Phyllis Miller around how we do that in interim to actually understand one, I think. What the actual concerns are, whether and actually that the accessibility to education, skills, training, how that's done, and rather than me sat here with a white middle class male trying to tell our youngsters what the best way forward is. Actually seeking out their views, how we do that, and I've engaging with Phyllis Miller to try and do that in the intervening period.
Thank you. I think, I mean, I'd certainly appreciate an update on that as and when that takes place, perhaps alongside the final document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other speakers, so I think we have considered that. Thank you very much indeed, Tim. And I'm very sorry indeed we're going to have to make you hang around to the end of the meeting for the demand responsive transport item, which we've moved. Thank you. Members, budget scrutiny is the next item, and particularly the responses to the consultation. So we have in person with us John Alsop and Rob Emery. So if either John or Rob or both would like to briefly introduce this item, and then we can briefly consider it.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So this follows on from the discussions we've had at overview and scrutiny and previously, in particular on the 10th of January. Obviously, be aware that the board approved the draft budget for consultation purposes on the 30th of November. That was a 6-week consultation which ended on Friday, the 13th of January. And following the social media campaign, the final number of respondents to the online consultation was 690. And a summary of those responses is set out in Appendix 3 to the budget board paper, which also includes the formal response of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee that was discussed at the last meeting. There are 2 papers relating to the budget. The Deputy Mayor is planning to debate both of those papers together concurrently due to the interlinked nature of them, and then to vote on each recommendation as set out in the 2 papers following that debate. The Mayor's draft budget, it's the first time that there has been a proposal to implement a general precept of £12 on a Band D property, which will raise about £3.6 million specifically in response to the transport pressure, again, as discussed previously. And the board will be asked to consider the proposal and to approve the draft budget. The second paper contains 4 recommendations. That includes to approve the amount and apportionment of the transport levy to the 2 highways authorities for the 23-24 financial year, incorporating a 2% increase, which is lower than the 12.6% that the levy could be increased by. Board is also recommended to approve the revenue budget for 23-24 and the medium-term financial plan to 26-27, the capital programme, and to note the Section 73 officers statutory Section 25 statement. There were a number of changes that have been made since the draft November version of the budget, and those are set out in the paper under paragraph 4. including a formal change towards the new directorate structure. As mentioned previously, there are a number of new executive directors who are in the process of being appointed, and they will form a new structure. So the costs and the funding of the bus pressures, the assumptions of the funding is now included in these figures. The updates also reflect any changes that have been made as a result of board approvals since November, some additional funding, and also some changes to staffing assumptions. And those impact on the changes, the impact of all of those changes are now reflected under Table 1 and Table 2 at the end of Section 6, which show that all revenue and capital balances are positive after each year of the medium-term financial plan. The inclusion in this paper is the Sections 25 statement, and that is a requirement of the Local Government Act for the Section 73 officer to report on the robustness of estimates and the adequacy of financial reserves. The reserves position has been based on the assumptions of current and future funding streams, including the release of the paused mayoral capacity funding of £1 million for this year, and also the LEP core funding of 375,000. We've reviewed the levels of revenue and capital reserves in the light of the current uncertain market conditions, high levels of inflation, and as it is currently set out, the budget for next year and the capital programme is balanced and affordable over the lifetime of the medium-term financial plan. Both Rob and myself are here to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Members? Councillor Hassel.
I just thank you for that. I just wanted to raise really a logistical question, and it's really from a Huntingdonshire District Council perspective. I just wanted to make certain that my understanding from officers at HDC is that 3rd of February is a drop date for its ability to collect any mayor's precept. And I just wanted to make certain that you were aware of that, and potentially you've squared that away with other councils who are likely to collect.
Yes, thank you. So, apologies. Yeah, so we had a meeting with all the finance officers last Friday, and there was a couple of concerns raised by other finance officers, including from Huntingdonshire. One was I think it was to do with the software that the revenues team are using, which needs to be updated, as I understand. So yeah, we will be working with them. Obviously, if the decision is made on Wednesday, that should give ample time for us to provide them with certainty of what the amount is likely to be. The difficulty might be if the mayoral precept is challenged, or if the budget falls, then the rules of the finance order come into play, and there could be a delay. But obviously, we'll try and get the information as quickly as we can to officers.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Firstly, I was worried I hadn't got all the financial figures, but I have found the pages now. What was missing is the link between the expenditure column, expenditure pages, and the summary. And I think it would be helpful if that link could be provided in future. It's very difficult to see where the figures are flowing. The levy was mentioned. The levy is on the higher level councils, Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. Why was it only 2%? And it's obviously inadequate in terms of the costs of running the bus service? And is it a fix for us, or how is that arrived at? The consultation summary, it gives you a remarkably good example of distortion by a group of people in the area who were led by people from this committee, I suspect, who went back home and shelled up some responses in the Fenland area. This is a good example of where things can go wrong if you follow the figures blindly. So I do think that consultation has a place in things, but as has been said earlier, you have to be very careful the way you use it. I'll leave that for now then. Thanks.
Thank you. John, in particular figures, I think, rather than commenting on what people may or may not have done in Finland, maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. So so the as mentioned previously, the increase in the amount of the levy is capped by the inflation figure for, I think, the September and the previous September to the year of the levy, and we go through a process of where possible agreeing any increase with the two highways authorities. Those discussions have taken place. We've come up with a suggested increase of 2%, and that is in line with the majority of other mayoral combined authorities. And I think whilst we could increase the levy, the impact of that would be to potentially increase. Well, it certainly would push the burden of those increased costs onto the two highways authorities, and the likelihood is that they would need to recover that through other means, including potentially looking at council tax. So yes, we have had that discussion. We could have gone higher, but for these purposes, we settled on 2% in agreement with those two authorities.
Yes, I think we all see the problem. I don't think we'd want to impose too much on the two authorities with their own financial problems already. But it does show that the fact that our overall budget is fixed for several years is a major problem to us. We're going to have to look for other income streams.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Atkins.
Sorry, I think my questions have now been answered because I've now found the consultation responses. We may just need to check some of the documentation that it's pointing in the right place, because it pointed me to item 3.4 of the board agenda, which does not exist. So perhaps just double check those papers in ahead, because it wasn't clear where I've now found the consultation. I can now understand the comments just made by fellow councillors, so I'll leave the floor open.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. Yeah, with the levy totaling 3.6 million, John, which is what you said, as I understand it, that's almost exactly the bus costs that we're facing. Two questions I have on that are: you mentioned an approach that you had to reserves. All the indications are that inflation's coming down. I wondered how far you'd looked into that and what you'd gone, or whether you'd just taken the snap window at the time, which I would agree we were at high inflation. The second issue is, what allowance is there for non-payment of the levy? I'm assuming that's a very, very tiny amount, but there must be an allowance in there for not all of the 3.6 million being collected, and therefore thus being less than the bus levy.
I might ask Rob to come in on that final point. But so in terms of the 3.6 million, that's just the Peterborough City Council element. So so the total level is 13.5 million in terms of the levy. I don't know if that's what were you referring to, the levy or the precept? Ah, yes. Yes, it was. Sorry, Rob, did you want to come in on that one?
Last one, good. So yeah, talking about the council tax precept. In terms of non-collection, there's no specific allowance built in. We're considering it part of the overall minimum revenue reserve, which is built into the budget at 4.5% of our total gross expenditure.
In terms of the inflation, yeah, so I think the
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment really on what Councillor Robertson said. I mean, looking at the response from Fenland, yes, it's very high, but it may be that Fenland were the ones I think who missed out. One of their routes wasn't saved, wasn't it? Or part of it, I believe, back in September, October. So it may be that they're thinking, well, we don't want to pay this precept because we're not getting any benefit out of it. I'm just thinking aloud there, but that may be. But it's a very small percent. It's a very small statistical population to gain any sort of semblance of what's behind it.
We did have a rather peculiar instance, I think, last year in which there was a massive write-in campaign from residents in Whittlesea regarding a particular road scheme, which seemed to attract, I think, several hundred comments from memory, all of the same wording. So I think there are some things we need to look at in terms of how we consider the responses that come into consultations. But point made. I'm not seeing any other hands at the moment. Oh no, I'm Councillor Hay.
Thank you. I have a question about Appendix 1A, the draft Chief Executive Office revenue budget, including the Mayor's draft budget. In 22-23, there's a figure of 260,000 for Mayor's office staff, but in the years going forward, there's no figure whatsoever. Is he not having any office staff? Or has that been moved under the Chief Exec? Because there is mayoral advisors and policy team that in 22-23 had no figures, but going forward, 23-24 is a total of 499,000.
Use the other mic.
sorry, there we are. Yes, you're exactly right. So as part of the improvement plan and the move to a new structure, there is the mayoral staff that was previously within the mayoral budget. Those will now be reporting into a new chief executive team, which will include advisors that will support the mayor and his priorities going forward. So yes, it's not that those roles have absolutely disappeared from the structure. It's just that they have been moved into a different part of the organisation.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it from members. So thank you very much indeed, John and Rob, for that. I noticed that we have on a future entry in our work programme a consideration of the way in which the combined authority consults on its budget, and I think that was a hangover from the comments we made last time. But it is something I think we need to explore in more detail, because there's a lot of things we need to consider about that, and a lot of improvements I think we could suggest be made. But thank you very much indeed, John and Rob. Our next item then is the Combined Authority Forward Plan. Do any of our lead members have any issues they need to raise with us about the forward plan of the Combined Authority? Councillor Atkins.
Some very brief updates from me. So just to note that at their meeting in 2 days' time, the board will consider a business case to support a project called Meanwhile. Took me a little while to work out that's what it's called, at the core site in Cambridge City. This is 1 million in capital. I'm picking this up as part of my role as lead member on climate change. This 1 million in capital will be to support a community space focused on enabling groups and businesses tackling climate change to do so effectively. It's an interesting proposal. Haven't really seen anything like that before, and if it's something of interest, might be worth looking at, and may have, maybe something that could be replicated in other parts of the combined authority in the future as well. Also, at their March meeting, there'll be a climate annual report. So we may have an informal discussion about that in February if we have any details by then. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Meanwhile, sounded a bit like my dentist. Rebranded, confused me for a bit. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Not seeing any other hands on that one. So if we move forward then to the Combined Authority Board agenda for Wednesday, whether there are any issues that need to be raised. I think, looking at it, that most of the not serious, that's a totally wrong word, most of the significant issues for discussion are ones that we've already covered in our meeting today. That's not to say that other issues are unimportant or not serious before anybody gets carried away. Okay, thank you very much. The Overview and Scrutiny work programme is with us at the end of this agenda, and I think we're moving towards the decision that we do not use the February reserve date for this meeting, but that we instead interpolate an informal discussion about the role and functioning and priorities of this committee, and then come back and regroup in March. Does that sound about right? Is there anything else that we need to pick out of the work programme for this committee for the moment? Don't think so. So thank you very much indeed. The date of the next meeting, therefore, is Monday, 20th of March. Now, we have one agenda item which I announced earlier on in the meeting has been moved to the end because it contains an exempt appendix with some data in it. I am going to try to take as much as possible of this item in public session, because I think we owe it to the public to do so. If members fear that they may stray into the exempt paper, perhaps they can either restrain themselves or signal, at which point we will need to move into confidential session. So, Tim, would you like to start? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, members, and good morning again. I'm here to present an update on the Ting service, but before I continue, I'd like to clarify the position around the bus strategy, to provide some more information around the statement in the paper around the DFT, and also the timeframe for franchising and the BSIP, which was touched on earlier by Gordon Mitchell. The bus strategy was unfortunately launched twice on Wednesday with incorrect versions uploaded, the first with a track change and the second with an old version. On Friday, we relaunched the consultation, with the document being the same as the version that was agreed at the Transport Infrastructure Committee and Board in November. Those people who have completed a survey and letter details to be contacted, we've asked them to resubmit or to confirm they're happy with the original comments to be remained unchanged. This consultation will be open for 6 weeks, and the findings will be fed back into this committee, but also the Transport Infrastructure Committee in due course. In relation to the statement on the Department for Transport, I would like to provide clarity on the detail contained in Councillor Hayes' report to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in October regarding the buses. The report referenced views expressed by the Department for Transport with regard to why the BSIP was not supported, specifically that it was not ambitious enough, including reference to road charging. While this remains the officer's recollection of the meeting, this specific detail was not recorded in the minutes. The combined authority has not yet received written detailed comment back from the Department for Transport on its BSIP, of which I do continue to press for further comment. Based on this basis, it is proposed that as part of this committee for the October ONS report is amended and a revised paper circulated to this committee. We'll continue to work with the Department for Transport as we prepare a refresh BSIP for members to consider later in the year. Ahead of the Ting update and following Gordon Mitchell's update previously, I just wanted to confirm the timeframe for the BSIP and the franchising arrangement going forward. BSIP, which otherwise known as our Bus Service Improvement Plan, will be going to May-June round of Transport Infrastructure Committee and Board, and at the same time, we'll be providing an update regarding our franchising. But also we'll also be looking at enhanced partnership, because we cannot preclude the investigation about which is the most preferred version for our framework going forward. So moving on to the Ting, this report provides an update to the Combined Authority's use of the demand responsive transport and the Ting trial in particular. At the November meeting of the Transport Infrastructure Committee, the Ting service was discussed, and there was collective support of all the committee members for the continuation of the service. As part of the paper that I provided today, there are 2 points of clarification. The appendix that was alluded to by the chair does not contain monies regarding Section 106, and therefore with regard to cost per passenger journeys. And the fourth bullet point in paragraph 2.23 needs to be updated to reflect what's in the appendix following this update. The report also outlined a brief of process in relation to the extension of the service. This brief specifically relates to an absence of appropriate authorisation. This should not have happened, and in light of this breach in process, the Chief Executive for the Combined Authority instigated an internal investigation. This report summarises the key recommendations of the internal investigation. The improvement measures are being introduced, and in summary provided to members on progress against these findings and associated actions in due course. The report provides further clarity around the call-in at the November 22 Combined Authority Board into the decision of the Transport Infrastructure Committee decision and the procurement process of the Ting service. I commend this paper to the committee and are happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. We're invited to note and comment on this report. So, members, Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chair. At the last full council meeting of Cambridgeshire County Council, a question was asked of Councillor Nethingsayer as the board member on the CPCA with regard to the dial-a-ride service. One part of which she came back was about the cost, which she said was being worked on and we would hear further when those figures were available. The other part of which she hasn't come back on, so I'm hoping you can fill me in. I understand there was a mapping exercise, and on that mapping exercise, it shows what I can only describe as blue blobs. And this is where there were going to be the equivalent of the Ting service dial-a-ride. We were told that there was going to be 12 buses available, but there was more blue blobs than there was buses, and there was no blue bus within the blue blob for Chatteris. What is the point of having blobs on there to indicate that it's going to be a dial-a-ride when you haven't got enough buses to do it?
So specifically regard the mapping exercise, will need to go back and see what that exercise is, because this is the first I've obviously heard of this. So I'm happy to take it away and come back and both for the committee, but also as Councillor Hay to give you a direct response on that.
Could I just throw in a question here to Councillor Hay? Is there a possibility, thinking about mapping, that blue blobs on maps could have referred to the maps included in the GCP Making Connections consultation? Because that did have blue blobs for demand responsive transport, and I wondered whether there's been a confusion.
I was told when asking the question that the blue blobs indicated where there was dial-a-rides.
Which is And you're saying that's different to demand responsive transport? No, because the Making Connections Greater Cambridge Partnership consultation, which concluded at the end of December, had maps in which had blue blobs in, and the blue blobs were demand responsive transport areas. And I'm wondering whether that is the mapping, because I've not seen any mapping out in the public domain associated with the BSIP, and I'm not sure whether that was the reference that was being made.
I'm sure we were shown this by Oliver Howarth.
Sorry, you were shown it by Oliver Howarth. Right. Tim.
Yeah, so say I will take this away, and I'll come back with with an answer to both of the committee, but also to Councillor Hay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hassall and then Councillor Coles.
Yeah, thanks for the update. So I think Ting has been very well received. I'm quite interested though, because at the moment, living in Huntingdonshire, is that we have competing bus services really. So you have Ting, but also we have the normal buses, if you like, going to bus stops. So and obviously when you start to look at the expenses, because as we sit right now, £16.50 per customer on the Ting service is and falling somewhere in the mid range of our bus services, some quite heavy subsidies there. And so I guess my concern is we appear to be subsidising two sets of buses. Is there any plan in this 3-year period where we've extended Ting for? Is there any plan to amalgamate those bus services in some way that creates a better bus service for residents, but also makes more efficient use of the subsidies?
Right. Yes, thank you, Councillor. That does help me because there was part of the introduction that I forgot to introduce. So with regard the next financial year, the passenger transport team are doing a thorough review of the whole network. So looking at what is the right mix. So looking at both the cost per passenger journey, which some of them are quite significant in the appendices, and actually going, is that the right way to do it? Is there a better way to deliver the service? But also, is it better to extend demand responsive transport in certain areas and do less conventional service? So we are doing a thorough review, which will be in the autumn, to look at what is the right mix around that, along with our subsidies, etc.
We just come back on that. Yeah, and similarly, I didn't notice any figures on reliability. Is that going to be part of that study as well?
So yeah, so part of the review will be cost, but also reliability, but also we're built into that punctuality, so they're slightly different. But also looking at accessibility, because ultimately in some areas some of these routes are our only ways of accessing education, skills, retail, etc. Think of the quality of life. So building on those layers, so it's not just in the framework looking at the basic cost per passenger, which is important, but then putting those layers on top as well, and understanding that, and that's going to go back through our transport committee, and I assume that will come back to this committee as well.
Thank you. Councillor Coles was next.
Thank you, Chair. 223 talks about the cost per journey of £16.20 expected to fall significantly in year 2. Could you just explain why you think that's going to fall and how much it's likely to fall by?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? I was repeat the question.
Yes, of course. It's 223, Ting performance quantitative. And I think it's the third bullet point. Cost per passenger journey was £16.20 in year 1, October 21 to 22, expected to fall significantly in year 2. I'm just wondering how far do you predict, and how is that going to be achieved? I'll have a second question after that.
So with regard to prediction, I I wouldn't want to put a number on it at the moment, but if we think about the actual the cost, having worked with Vector and spoken to them about their new contract, they think at better ways of operation. So whether that vehicles and how they actually position their vehicles and just operational improvements, along with driver improvements, etc. And they are thinking that if they can increase the numbers of people accessing this service, and that may mean that you can then have another vehicle. So the cost overall will decline, but there's a significant push around the communication around the comm to actually market the service as well.
Thank you. So effectively, the more people use it, the cheaper it gets because it becomes more and more profitable. And yeah, that makes complete sense. But my second question was really looking at other services similar to Ting. I'm particularly thinking of Call Connect, which runs between Northamptonshire through Peterborough and out to Stamford. That's been going for some time. It's very successful. Have you made any comparative links between that service and this one to see whether a new service is necessarily going to be as economically effective, or whether we could piggyback on other work done by other councils where it might be a more affordable option?
So the two answers to that, Councillor. The first one is Jules Lent, who just joined as our policy advisor, is doing a thorough review around all demand responsive transport, but that is as a national but also international, about what lessons can be learned, etc. And also I sit on I'm a board member for Smart Transport, and actually as part of that we're doing a review around demand responsive transport and what lessons can be learned, the good and bad, and actually some of those and try and bring those into Cambridge and Peterborough.
That's fascinating that you're doing that. I would love to read that when it reports to see how you found it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. Yes, it's very interesting to see that the demand responsive transport has actually been so well received, and it looks as though it's going to grow in the usage. I do think something like this is what is needed to provide a genuine alternative to car ownership, and which some people can't afford anyway. But in rural areas, I can see that this is a great innovation, and quite like to see how it would work in urban areas as well. The report talks also about some of the services have got relatively high costs per passenger usage, and obviously that's going to have to be dealt with. But it shouldn't necessarily be to remove the service, but to stimulate the usage of the service. And I'd like to hear more about that as well as trying to find savings.
Yeah, so just 2 points around what the councillors just said. Is one is regard to DRT, it's important to actually have correct interchange and integration into other nodes. So actually, you can get when you get to railway station, they're at the door rather than quite a lot of distance away. So we need to continue to work on that. And then with regard to the high cost, I think it leads back into what I was suggesting, what I was saying earlier around the framework we're looking at around how we do the assessment of our bus network. It is important. The cost is important, but ultimately there are other policy levers that we need to be addressing as well.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, my point was somewhat stolen a bit by Councillor Coles, but mine was more specific, which is in information that we have, and I'm trying not to sway into the other area here, but it's information that we have that there's a direct comparison between Ting and the Ely Zipper, which are both similar but different designed things. And my understanding is that Ely Zipper is running around about 23-25% of the cost per passenger journey of Ting. So similar to what Councillor Cole said, what analysis has been done as to why aren't we rolling out Ely Zipper at that cost as opposed to Ting?
There's definitely lots of positives that we need to learn from Ely Zipper and build in. And also the other thing is Ely Zipper has got a Section 106 contribution that also reduces the cost per passenger journey as well. So that needs to be taken into consideration. So the numbers may actually be more inclined for the e-Zipper, but we are looking at work that we're doing around e-Zipper, and that contract will go out to procurement following the budget conversation on Wednesday.
Just go back on that as a point of utter clarification, because I think that's absolutely
And
critical.
do try again not to stray as well.
Yeah, okay. The local district council contribution is or is not counted in your passenger per head figure.
In the appendix you currently got, it is not included, but actually I do have a version that has, because we got contributions for 4 from Peterborough and 3 other services as well to allow, but I wanted to compare apples and apples. So therefore, I'm happy to provide this committee with the ones where they got Section 106 money included as well.
I look forward to getting more involved with this as my repertoire role. But I do absolutely agree that we want to compare apples with apples here, and to have not done so is a little bit misleading. So I think we all need that information, whether it's confidential or not. I think we need that information to our hand to know that we can compare one service against another.
I thought the point being made was what we had was the apples and apples because it didn't include other extraneous sources of funding.
Yes, so in the appendix it does note that it does not contain any Section 106, but I can provide that on those services that are.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I mean, I read this as a very successful pilot. Obviously, committee members have reasonable concerns about the cost per passenger journey, but this is the first year of a new service. It's to be expected that demand will be kind of initially a little lower and will then pick up. And it seems to have beaten the expectations that the Combined Authority had. So I think there's a lot to welcome here. Comments and questions. First question would be, what is the prospect of some of this being rolled out to other areas in the Combined Authority in the next few years? Do we have any kind of idea for when we will have learned enough from this initial pilot to identify other areas where it could be successfully rolled out? My second question was perhaps sort of more advice than anything. Again, in paragraph 2.23, which is apparently our favourite paragraph, but performance information. People booking immediate transport are typically being picked up within 17 minutes. I'm going to guess that that's some kind of mean or median figure. I think my sense for a bus service would be we want to know how quickly, say, 80, 85, maybe 75% of passengers are picked up within. I think rather than, it's all very well saying the average is 17, but if, that could mean that, say, a lot of people are waiting kind of half an hour. I think a good kind of metric would be, what's the time within which 80% of people are picked up? That would give us a real sense, I think, of whether this is a service that people can rely on to reach kind of time critical appointments without having to leave sort of 2 hours before they need to. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah. So just on those 2 points, I'll take the second one first. Is with regards to 17 minutes, I totally agree. The actual percentage is key because, as you say, it could be anywhere from 1 minute to 34 and etc. So the percentage figure will go away and have a look at that and see whether that can be provided. And if it can't, then at this stage, then we'll make sure it's provided for the next round. And then with regard the rolling out of the DRT further. There was universal agreement at the Transport Inter Committee when it was discussed that actually other areas do want demand response transport. They see it as the positive thing going forward. They understand the point of it, but they do also understand that the cost is, and that element. So as part of that framework that I alluded to earlier, it is a key component of that assessment work that we're doing next year to understand where it is appropriate, how we can roll it out, and how that can be done. Does that mean that we have West Huntingdonshire and then we add a bit to that to extend that area, or do we go and do somewhere different, whether that's East Cambs or whether that's South Cambs or wherever that might be, and have a distinct pilot there? So that work needs to be continued as part of that framework.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel.
Yeah, just a quick question on the age profile. Are you noticing that older generations are perhaps struggling with the the app and to use Ting, or are we? Is that an issue? And if you, for example, if this took off and replaced existing bus services, would that be a problem for that generation?
Can I just come in on the back of that? Because I was going to ask exactly about the age profile also. I understand that Ting has been really enthusiastically taken up by the younger generation, which is good because we need to get younger people onto buses. However, my experience culturally, talking to a number of older people in my own area, is that there is that kind of that the older generation, many of them actually want a bus, even if it is a bus, a scheduled service that they know when it turns up, and struggle with the DRT and are not actually that keen on it. Um, Firstly, really good marks if it is engaging younger people in public transport, yay for that. But secondly, how are we going to reduce or do what we can about the risk of some older people being left behind by this?
So just on those 2 points is, I think the positive part is that it's been very well received by the younger community. To just echoing what the chair has said. And then the other point is around the older demographics is, we're struggling. I've just been in a meeting before this around with the bus operators, and they're suggesting that actually trying to get the traditional the older age group to get back on buses in the first place at the moment following COVID. There's still a concern around that, and how do we get that messaging out that buses can be safe, are safe, etc., and how we do that. There's a point before we even go down the route of which type of bus we need to get our older generation using public transport again. And then the next point is, I fully understand the point around people like certainty. They like so so I'm saying, so with a bus service, they'd like to say the bus will be here at this point, etc. The 2 points on that as well is, firstly, we need to work with our bus operator to make sure those buses turn up, the scheduled buses. But also the second point is, how do we get the messaging out to those areas that it may be expanded to, that actually this is a positive thing, and actually we don't necessarily rely on going through app, because yes, I know that's where we're going to, but actually is there another way of booking these services, because not everyone it will be convenient. Well, we're confident in using apps going forward, so there's definitely some work to be done there.
Thank you, Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Joe. Another thought occurred to me about the future possibility that there's a marketplace being built up, and it won't just be Ting that might be in that marketplace. And then if we've got an app, have we got an app that's going to be sufficiently stable that it can be used across other providers? And do we own it in effect, or does the combined authority own it, so that we're not going to find that on your mobile phone you have 6 different apps depending on which way you're going? So, the future proofing of this concept, if you like.
So it's quite timely. Part of the discussion I had this morning with bus operators was around cross operator ticketing. And so in the first instance, before we get into the app element, that actually you should, as a consumer, you should be able to get on from point A and try and get to point B, even if that's by 2 different operators. There should be one through ticket across the board, because ultimately we're trying to encourage people to use our network. If you put barriers in the way, then people, if they got a car, will go, well, I might as well just get in the car because it's less time consuming, less issues, etc. So we need to make it as encouraging as possible to make these things, the information to be available, make it safe, reliable, etc. So that's key. So we need to get the cross operator ticketing working, and then build that into the app and make those stable apps going forward.
So just to clarify, can we own the app that we then ask franchisers to use? That's my bottom line, yeah.
That's my aim, is the fact that we have one app that go across all operators, and all operators use it, and whether we own that app or whether it's maintained for us, there's one app that if you want to do about public transport across the combined authority, you go to one place. That's my ultimate aim.
And that includes trains, or am I going too far with that?
I believe that we need to. For me, as a transport passionate transport professional, that I believe that's where we should be going to. I think I know the issues with our train operators, but there should be one app, whether you're travelling into London or whatever that might be, how you get there. But the number of hurdles there with network rail, etc. But we can aspire to it, can't we?
And I think with some of our bus operators as well. Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, just come back. The app is absolutely critical here. I'll just share a very quick story with you this morning as an example of where it can and can't work. So, coming to Pathfinder House today for this meeting, I have no idea where to park. So, I'll go round and round the block 3 or 4 times. And in the end, I think, well, I'm going to have to park in the George and walk down. But when I park to the George, it's a different parking app needed to pay, and I've got no change. So I try and download the app there and then from my app store, but there's no Wi-Fi. So I am now catch 22. Do I get a ticket, or do I what do I do? And I mentioned this to a gentleman as he walked by, and he very very kindly let me go onto his phone to download the app using his phone as a link, which was remarkable. But I'm just thinking about, you get to the bus stop, you realise it's a demand thing. Are our bus stops going to be Wi-Fi enabled to allow them to download the app? It's an absolutely critical thing, because I doubt many people will think of downloading the app beforehand.
Fair point. And for future reference, the best place to park is the little car park immediately as you come in off the 1307. I think we've concluded business on this item without going into confidential session. So thank you very much indeed, members, for that. Thank you, Tim, for your report. And I think that now concludes the business of this meeting. So thank you, members.